We designed AeroDinosaur as a one-stop, informative, and experience-centric channel, covering heavy piston-powered commercial prop liners that represented the state-of-the-art from the 1930s into the early 1960s, as well as military aircraft powered by variants of the same engines. In most of our videos, we also feature rare, inside and out, full audio footage of operations of the few remaining aircraft in these categories up to this day. In the future, vintage propliner contemporaries such as the Lockheed L-188 Electra may be considered as subjects for this channel. When on our channel homepage, please click on videos from the choices at the top to see the full range of our video offerings. Also, if you click on playlists on that same bar, you will find in one place our library of quality propliner and heavy piston videos from other YouTube creators. And of course, don't forget to slam the subscribe button. We'd also like to mention our upcoming video series here on AeroDinosaur channel we call The Poor Man's Hangar Tour. In this series, we delve into the power evolution of U.S. heavy radial power plants and the aircraft they powered from the 1930s through the so-called overdevelopment of engines and airframes in the 1950s before the dawn of the jet age. We start with the earliest lower-powered engines and move forward in time to the last high-powered variants of the same engines used decades later. Since we're too poor to own any airplanes or hangars, we resort to utilizing our lifetime scale replica collection as a starting point for each discussion. The models as presented will be liberally complemented with photographs and video footage of the actual engines and aircraft under discussion, making this truly an experience-centric poor man's hangar tour. We'll also compare the big radials to competing liquid-cooled V12 engines of the period, including Rolls-Royce, Daimler-Benz, and Allison engines, and the big Bristol radials out of the UK. In doing this, we quickly find our discussions cannot be limited to any single aircraft category, such as military versus commercial, or fighters versus propliners. All are intertwined in this evolution and cannot be separated. The earliest monster radial engines typically started life in military fighters, bombers, and transports, and with continuous improvement and evolution over the 2 decades, found their way into commercial airliners and their military transport and surveillance counterparts as a stopgap for jet-age technology. We hope you enjoy our different perspective on the piston aero engines and aircraft of the mid-20th century, and we look forward to bringing this to life for you. Hi, John Reed, AeroDinosaur. In parts 3 and 4 of our Airline Industry Woeful Start series, we covered the development and operation of several variants of the original piston-powered DC-3. Most typically fitted with the 1,200 horsepower Pratt & Whitney 14-cylinder R1830 two-row radial engines, the other variants we covered were the rare Pratt & Whitney R2000 powered variant of 1,450 horsepower each, and the C-117 Super DC-3 redesign powered by the advanced 1,525 horsepower refinement of the 9-cylinder Curtiss-Wright single-row R1820. Today, we'll look at several major departures from the piston DC-3 variants including a very brief look at the first three most prominent turboprop conversions by Conroy aircraft that were flying from 1969 into the mid-1980s and never entered production. They did little more than demonstration tours, and the third example was utilized in limited scientific research roles. Our main feature is a turboprop conversion that entered production in the early 1990s and is still in production today. I should mention that there were two earlier turboprop conversions by the British in 1949 and 1950, one as a turboprop testbed and the other as a proof of concept for British European Airways. These were both short experiments, and afterwards both DC-3's were refitted with their original R1830 piston engines. The turboprop conversions that we cover today were often dubbed as DC-3 replacements. But from a raw economic standpoint, we will see that in actuality this was not the case. Our main coverage will feature operational footage of the current production DC-3 turboprop conversion that I took at Oshkosh in 1993. We will see that the DC-3, a product of the airline industry turmoil in the 1930s and catalyst for the explosive growth of the airlines in the 1950s, is alive and well in the 2020s, nearly 90 years after its first flight. The first conversion we'll briefly cover is the Conroy aircraft Turbo DC-3 out of Santa Barbara, California, which was first flown in May 1969. And then we'll summarize their second conversion of a C-117 Super DC-3 into their Super Turbo 3. Both these conversions were powered using two Rolls-Royce Dart Mark 510 turboprop engines used on the four-engine Vickers Viscount. Other variants of the Dart engine were then powering the Fokker F-27 Friendship and a stretched derivative, the Fairchild F-227, both of which were common sights in the U.S. and the world over from the 1960s into the 1980s. The darts used on the Turbo 3 were flat rated at 1,350 shaft horsepower to keep the 3's airframe stress under limits, but the engines were capable of developing 1,650 shaft horsepower. Because turboprop engines are lighter than their reciprocating counterparts, they had to be mounted further forward on their nacelles to maintain proper center of gravity for the Turbo 3 and the Super Turbo 3. The Dart turboprops increased the DC-3's cruising speed from 170 miles an hour to 215 miles per hour. Over the next several years, the Turbo 3 went on an extensive demonstration 28-nation tour, but there was minimal airline interest and no buyers. By 1977, the then idle Turbo 3 became the subject of another Conroy turboprop conversion, which we'll discuss in a minute. The next Conroy aircraft conversion was that of a Super DC-3S that had the military designation of C-117. This stretched, more powerful piston version of the DC-3 is summarized in Part 4 of our Airline Industry Woeful Start series. At the urging of one of its corporate associations, Conroy Aircraft thought the Super DC-3 would make a great commuter aircraft, as the federal regulators were soon to allow commuters to operate large aircraft. Also, with the oil drilling frenzy on the north slope of Alaska, a cargo version of this concept was being considered. Essentially using the same Rolls-Royce darts as the Turbo 3, the Super Turbo 3 had a cruising speed that was slightly higher than the Turbo 3, and gross takeoff weight was increased to 35,000 pounds from 25,000 pounds for the standard DC-3. It turned out that due to the smaller diameter propellers, the Super Turbo 3 had a much longer takeoff run, disqualifying it for commuter service, since those operations typically serve smaller airports with shorter runways. Despite larger propellers being tested, the market for this plane never materialized, and the commuter airlines were drawn to newer, clean-page commuter aircraft in the large transport category, such as the Fokker F-27 and Fairchild 227. While the Super Turbo 3 was eventually awarded a supplemental type certificate with propeller and other modifications, No buyers were found, and the plane sat idle for years until it was badly damaged in a ground collision with a civilian Lockheed L-100 Hercules. This leads us to the Conroy Tri-Turbo 3 freighter that morphed out of the original unsuccessful Turbo 3 aircraft. By 1976, Conroy established a new firm called the Specialized Aircraft Company at Camarillo, California. This was for the purpose of developing a tri-motor turboprop conversion of the DC-3 using the now idle Turbo 3 as a prototype hull. Instead of using Rolls-Royce darts, this reconfigured plane would be powered by three 1,174 shaft horsepower Pratt & Whitney Canada PT6A-45 turboprops. This engine was uprated from the PT6s that normally powered aircraft, such as the Beech King Air Corporate Twin and de Havilland Twin Otter commuter aircraft, and would drive more efficient Hartzell 5-blade propellers. The Tri-Turbo 3 first flew on November 2, 1977. In cruise flight, the nose engine could be shut down and feathered at will for more efficient cruise, albeit slower. Normal three-engine cruise speed was 220 to 230 miles per hour and 180 miles per hour on two engines, the latter increasing range at normal payload by 200 miles to 1,395 miles. This plane, too, didn't find a market, as it didn't receive FAA certification, so only the single demonstrator was built. It did find its way as a demonstrator under the names Maritime Patrol and Rescue and Polair, and flew with the U.S. Navy supporting scientific activities in both the Arctic and Antarctica well into the 1980s. This plane was destroyed in a 1986 ground fire, and there was purportedly a stillborn attempt to build another Tri-Turbo 3 with its undamaged components, but not much is known about this. This takes us to the most successful DC-3 turboprop conversion ever out of Oshkosh, Wisconsin, the Basler BT-67. Developed in the late 1980s and introduced in 1990, it's a stretched conversion powered by two Pratt & Whitney Canada PT6A-67R turboprops of 1,281 shaft horsepower each, which was only slightly more powerful than the PT6s used on the Conroy Tri-Turbo 3. Like the Tri-Turbo 3, the BT-67 utilized 5-blade Hartzell propellers. The fuselage was stretched by 40 inches to 67 feet 9 inches, and the plane has strengthened and mostly reskinned wings and airframe and modified wingtips, slowing the stall speed and improving overall aerodynamics. All hydraulics and electrical systems have been redesigned with the installation of state-of-the-art glass avionics. Similar to the Conroy conversions, the typical cruise speed is 210 miles per hour with a range of roughly 2,140 miles with optional long-range wing tanks, and maximum takeoff weight 28,750 pounds compared to 25,000 pounds for the standard piston DC-3. The BT-67 was and will most likely remain the most successful DC-3 turboprop conversion ever, with limited production starting in the early 1990s and continuing to this day. Each example is custom built to customer specifications, and approximately 70 aircraft have been completed to date. The Basler BT-67 has been sold to commercial, governmental, and military customers all over the world, mainly in cargo, paratrooping, smoke jumping, and scientific research capacities. Gunship versions were developed for the Colombian and Philippine Air Forces in their fights against local drug production and trafficking operations and political terrorists. Civilian operators include Ken Borak Air, with operating subsidiaries in Canada, China, and Australia, and the U.S. Forest Service, obviously in the U.S. Military operators include the Bolivian, Colombian, El Salvador, Mauritanian, and Royal Thai Air Forces. The exhaust system was designed with these military customers in mind, as the engine exhaust is vented over the wings to reduce potential infrared signatures. And now, the catch. A typical cost for a standard cargo BT-67 conversion is around $9 million, compared to a typical $300,000 price tag for a good used R1830 piston-powered DC-3 freighter. The cost alone for this otherwise excellent DC-3 turboprop conversion means that the BT-67 is not really a DC-3 replacement, so to speak, but an all-new zero-timed aircraft that does its specialized roles very well. I do need to point out that there's another company out there called Preferred Turbine 3 out of Ohio that's been producing PT6 DC-3 turboprop conversions like Basler, though I don't think on as large a scale. However, there is comparatively less recoverable information out there on them beyond their otherwise excellent website, which is unfortunate. And quite honestly, we simply don't have the footage or the photos of any of their conversions. So let's look at an early Basler BT-67 demonstrator in action at EAA AirVenture Oshkosh in 1993.
Basler was built in 1990. Warren Basler has operated DC-3s for more than 30 years. The DC-67 flat out is supposed to be from the right. for tactical approach. Look at that. Coming down, straight down for a 45-degree down line. What an angle. This is the last thing to go level it out. Just getting into those short mountains.